of Truth, one of my favorites.
Always good to talk with you. I've got a lot of ground to cover. Let's start with this gun thing. It's not even really necessarily a gun bill, but apparently there is a bipartisan plan now to pass legislation that would deal with uh, mental health in some cases, red flag laws. I think there's about 15 Republicans who are signed on in the Senate.
Yeah.
Is this going to happen?
Yeah, I believe it is. It's sort of fascinating because you have to grade everything in Washington on a curve these days. And what might not have seemed to have been such a spectacular accomplishment a few decades ago, in the current environment, is huge. It is one solid step forward. It will save lives. It's truly bipartisan, and it's a great accomplishment. Now, I'm pro Second Amendment. There are a few more things I'd like to see done too, but this thing is a big win for the country, and I think we can all be proud of it.
But obviously, there are some people. The funny thing is, if you asked a Republican, if you wanted to do a whole bunch of gun control, and you asked a Republican, well, what should we do? What would you do? You don't want to. You don't want to do gun control. What would you do? Well, like a lot of the things on this list are what a Republican would say, and yet there is going to be pushback from some Republicans, and we saw this happen down in Texas at the convention where Dan Crenshaw, a former Navy SEAL, was accosted by somebody, calling him a globalist for supporting Ukraine,
using
and
the
calling
big
him
Tucker Carlson insult line, Cyclops McCain or
Patch
whatever.
McCain.
Because he got his eyes shot out fighting for our country.
Yeah.
Pretty grim. On the other hand, and this was also, John Cornyn, the senator, was the Republican.
Right, Cornyn was booed at the convention.
He was aggressively booed. I would bet dollars to donuts, though, that his staff knew he would be booed there. We've been in an era for a while where we're kind of regular stock Republican conservatives. If they show up to a state party convention, they're likely to get booed and protested because those conventions are really a reflection of what I like to call the hobbyist class of the GOP grassroots, where it's a tiny percentage of the wider Republican universe, but they're into the social experience of showing up, wearing the red, white, and blue hat and the MAGA insulting T-shirt and acting like morons. So it's horrible. The thing they passed, the platform from Texas, Jefferson Davis would be like embarrassed, but there's a lot of hysteria about it. Sometimes the liberal media that this reflects the entire Republican Party. It doesn't, but shame on the Republican Party and the rest of the office holders for not condemning it a lot more vociferously.
It is interesting.
It's a subset, is the point I'm trying to make, and the Cornyn people probably knew they'd get booed. It's kind of normal now.
Like on one hand, you have a lot of evidence, and we're going to get into this, but a lot of evidence that the Republican Party is crazy. And then you have, 15 to 17, we'll see how many Senate Republicans who support this bill. And it makes me wonder, like, which of these things are true?
Yeah, I think if you look at people who habitually vote Republican in elections, they're a lot closer to the office holders. And we know from polling, they're quite comfortable with this bill. They're quite comfortable with background checks. They're comfortable with immigration reform. As you narrow the gauntlet down to high turnout Republican primary voters, then you get to this world that's about 1/3 crazy land, about 50%, don't say anything bad about Trump. He was a good president, but maybe we can move on a little. And you can see this in a new poll that's out today from the University of New Hampshire, looking at Trump versus DeSantis up there. And then you've got another 15, 18% who are anti-Trumper. So, the party is evolving forward, not necessarily in the best of directions, but you have a solid third of the primary world and 2/3 to 3/4 of the show up at conventions and scream and yell world who are still pretty stone cold crazy, ultra populist, and pretty much hate anybody in the alleged Republican establishment, which is code for eat with a knife and fork and have been seen around Mitch McConnell in the last year.
We should probably talk about this New Hampshire poll, right? It has DeSantis is up by, I think, 1 point among likely Republican voters in New Hampshire. This is happening, isn't it? It feels like this is gaining steam.
I think so. I tweeted about it with 3 observations. One, it's one poll and it's really early. There are going to be a lot more polls and primaries are hard to pull. So grain of salt. But two, it's clear that 50%, it's different by state, but that plurality, almost majority, maybe 45% of Republican voters who are not anti-Trump at all, but want to move beyond, is a group that DeSantis is the most famous contender. We have a lot of campaign left, is kind of grabbing, which has put him really in the hunt. And this poll shows that. And then the final point I made was, if I were DeSantis, I'd get a food tester, because this kind of data is going to drive Trump absolutely crazy. Last thing is, the New Hampshire primary is still, to use the Republican consultant slang, a little squishier than, Trump carried it. So it's not Rockefeller land. Yeah, McCain did. Remember, independents can vote, but it's not quite as hardcore or as Trumpy, in case they, in 16 did well, as some of the more Sunbelt states. But still, it is a clear indicator that the line I've been using, and Axelrod and I on Hacks on Tap and Gibbs always argue about this, but I believe through his own activity and his own actions and craziness of the last year, plus some of the undeniable stuff we're seeing in the January 6th hearings, which we can talk about, Trump, as we used to say around body shops after an accident, he got his frame bent. The car's never going to drive the same. So is it enough to deny him the nomination? Too early to tell. But I think the party, a big chunk of it, is starting to shake loose the idea of Trump 2.0.
Yeah. And if you can get a younger guy who's just as tough, but is actually winning culture war fights.
Right.
And, Mike, there is a lot of, before we had this polling data out of New Hampshire, there's been a lot of anecdotal evidence. I'm going to read you something from the Associated Press from like 3 days ago. Illinois conservative Pam Roll, who arrived at the conference Friday wearing a red Trump baseball cap and Trump 2020 necklace, said she still supports the former president, but increasingly finds herself in the minority among friends who have moved on, discarding their bumper stickers and embracing DeSantis. They're kind of like, get with the program. Why aren't you backing DeSantis, she said.
Yeah, I'm hearing people should never forget in politics or anything else in the world of communications that there is no more powerful word in advertising than new. And if Biden runs again and age is an issue, and somebody like a DeSantis who's younger and vigorous and picks up a lot of the Trump populism with maybe smarter management and less personal, cuckoo, narcissistic, it's all about me and robots took over the election and all that stuff, it opens up Trump to, hey, there's something better coming. People are allowed in a marketplace to say, I'm glad I voted for Trump and I sure love driving the Chevy for 4 years, but I'm switching over to the Ford now because it's got racing fins.
So if you were advising DeSantis, right? Okay, on one hand, I think you got to go now because lightning doesn't strike twice, and, strike while the iron is hot or whatever cliche. Like right now you're hot, you got to do it. But you got to win. You got to be reelected governor first. And you've also got Trump that, I don't know how you can keep him happy forever. How do you play this hand of cards?
Well, with the big caveat of DeSantis is not exactly my personal cup of tea. He's a cheap applause guy too, but I think he's a cynic. And I'd rather have a cynic who doesn't believe crazy, but is trying to use it as a tool to get himself elected than a crazy person like Trump. So what I would say to DeSantis now is, one, careful. This early stuff is all driven by the media that would love to have a full-fledged presidential primary start tomorrow morning. Good for them, not good for you. You got to go get reelected as governor. Second, your strategy is to outshine Trump in the same space, much like Governor Kemp did down in Georgia, where Trump is isolated into egotistical craziness and backward-looking jabbering. So ignore Trump. Don't be drawn into a contest with him, but go do what you're really good at, which is being Ron DeSantis and playing on culture issues that play throughout the entire primary. But slow walk the primary politics of it. Don't be reading New York Times story about meeting with big donors in Texas and all that. That can wait. You've still got an election, a big important governor's election. You have to win, and two, you can use as a platform for ideas to burnish the identity you will then take into the primaries next year. The last thing I'd say is Trump is wildly overrated, and you don't need to prove that now. That'll come when the whole thing is mark to market next year when the hand-to-hand combat starts.
Does it matter, though, who declares first?
Well,
Because Trump
very
is
few.
talking about preempting it.
Yeah, he might, but there's always going to be room for an alternative, I think. And DeSantis is big enough as a governor of Florida. He doesn't have to prove he has table stakes to run for president. If you're a governor of Texas or governor of California, you get a ticket to the show if you're at all adroit at using it. And I think, he's a problem for Rubio, who would probably like to run again. That was a problem we had last time in 2016. But I think DeSantis needs to build the muscles he's already building now, not worry about Trump. And I think he does have time. Filling the media's process narrative of who's running, that's driven by things like the poll today. You don't have to go out and pretend to run to do it. You just go out and be DeSantis, and because you're famous and getting attention for what you're doing as governor, a great platform outside of Washington. A lot of governors get elected president, get nominated. The polls will follow you, and then the media can go react to them. Like right now, wow, New Hampshire's a 50-50 race. Now, Trump's going to go crazy. He's throwing a stapler at somebody right now. Some of his yes men, there'll be a tweet because Trump can't be subtle. But that actually, if DeSantis ignores that and just plows ahead, makes Trump look even weaker and defensive and scared, which is gold for DeSantis.
You mentioned the January 6th committee hearing. How do you think that's going, and what will the impact be?
Well, I think the committee managers are doing as good of a job as can be done. I think we're now in the phase of it where they are presenting the information that's so simple and so obvious. The president leaning on Georgia Republicans and Arizona Republicans to steal the election for him. And even if the public line, it's kind of like I use a baseball analogy. Well, when you hear the Red Sox pitcher is a serial spousal abuser and steals candy from children and always drives on the wrong side of the street, that doesn't mean you go out the next day in your Red Sox hat and say, well, I'm a Yankee fan. No, it means you kind of look at you exchange a glance with all the other Red Sox fans, and we got an asshole on the team. So I think Trump got his frame bent. I think this is hurting and diminishing him. I think the Democrats occasionally skate on very risky ice of trying to turn this into a campaign commercial for the midterms. Big mistake. It's bigger than that. It's systemic. These hearings are very big and important. What the Dems have to know is this is not big enough to give them the Sorkin movie ending they want where it saves them in the midterms. They're losing the midterms because Biden is not connected on domestic policy, and there's huge anger about inflation, gas and groceries, pricing, meat and potato stuff. And hearings in D.C. will not get them out of that. But they're under the waterline. They're doing damage to Trump within the Republican Party, I think, and it'll take a while for that to be seen. And that's a huge win for America, for the truth.
That sounds about right. So you mentioned Republicans look well poised to do great in the midterms, but we have these people like Herschel Walker and Dr. Oz and Eric Greitens. Do you think that Republicans are going to leave some seats on the table due to the candidate selection? I mean, Greitens has not yet won the primary, but
here's hoping he won't. You asked the key question. So what I would say is it's less a question of Republicans doing great than Democrats doing poorly. So Republicans can kind of go into a coma and still win some elections. And looking at some of the candidates, a coma would be better than active campaigning. In the House, where wave elections are very powerful, the Republicans are looking really good. In the Senate, if the wave is big enough, even some really bad candidates could win. And we have some really bad candidates on the Republican side. We seem to be really good at that. We have been for a couple of cycles. So you start to wonder, all right, take a Pennsylvania. Will Oz be bad enough? And will Fetterman, who's kind of an uncola, kind of a different kind of politician, will he get a little special sauce going there where his attractiveness as a way to kind of protest politics because he's so different, looks different, acts different, and he's a populist too. He's kind of a fourth cousin of Trump economically in some ways, just kind of like Bernie and Trump have certain distant similarities in terms of, affecting kind of alienated voters. Will that be enough that the Repubs could blow Pennsylvania? Latest poll shows Oz is significantly behind. Again, early poll, a lot of cake left to cook before we ought to taste it. I think the wave is looking big enough that it's going to forgive a lot of stuff. But if Biden could get a domestic message, if he could get on offense, if he could quit doing stupid stuff like, hey, I'm going to take 20 cents off a gallon of gas, love me, which is just going to piss people off more, I think. Then, yeah, they could come back to life there. Missouri's going to be interesting because this Gretton's guy is a fetishing creep. That ad, I didn't retweet it because I don't want to give it any oxygen, but doing that, dressed up in this military badass attire, and then he's got a bunch of his moron friends to dress up in camo, and they go storm into an empty house with him at the end, by the way, and don't see him taking the door, Mr. Tough Guy. It was disgusting and basically called for violence. So, even in
we're going hunting for
rhinos. There's a great YouTube clip you can find of a rhino killing an elephant. So you don't underestimate rhinos. But my point being, he could get in trouble if he's the nominee and there is opposition. The attorney general is behind, but in the hunt. He could blow a safe Senate race. He's that bad, and he ought to. I would support any Democrat over that thug. So yeah, they could blow the Senate where the races are more about the candidates than the wave. But boy, the Biden guys and the Democrats need to do something to take some of the energy out of this wave between now and October. Election held tomorrow, I think the Republicans would win the Senate.
I keep having this thing where and I went through this with Michael Flynn, but you would think that maybe it's because I'm a conservative, kind of taught to revere the military, but you would think that becoming a Navy SEAL, that the training that you would have to go through and the commitment and the discipline and you're going to basic training and they're you got to ring the bell, right? I mean, they want you to quit. They're trying to get you to quit, and you have to be physically strong, but also mentally tough. You would think that the kind of person who would be able to go through that it would translate into having, political courage and decency and honor and commitment. And it just doesn't seem to work that way, does it?
Well, I think in the vast majority it does. I used to spend a fair amount of time around special operators. I was a civilian consultant for a while at the Pentagon, and I taught down at the PSYOP school at Fort Bragg at the Special Warfare Operations Center. And, we met a lot of those guys, even with the tough training, a lot of different flavors of them. And you can strive for 95% great, and they pretty much do, and still have some outliers. I would love to see the UDT SEAL Association, or there's another SEAL association or institute. They ought to condemn this guy because he owes his political career to their reflected glory. I mean, I give him a salute for his service. Anybody who serves, I salute. But he's milked that thing for his own political interest, and nobody's better qualified to blow the whistle on that kind of stuff than somebody from that brotherhood. And they shouldn't be quiet about him.
Well, one candidate that seems to be a good candidate that Republicans have nominated is Katie Britt.
Yeah.
I don't think there's much danger of a Republican losing that seat down there in Alabama. But I don't know if you saw today, Mo Brooks had his "you won't have Richard Nixon to kick around anymore" moment. He claims he's retiring from politics.
Fantastic.
Which
Good.
I guess we're supposed to
I hope
feel
we're that
bad
lucky.
about.
Yeah, no, he was bitter because he tried to out Yahoo Trump, and then Trump saw that Katie Britt came in with the powerful Shelby machine behind her, the incumbent senator, and she's more kind of Republican normal, what goes for Republican establishment normal in Alabama, and she started crushing him early, far superior candidate. Trump pulled his endorsement, and then kind of endorsed her, not in a way that motivated anybody, but in a way that he tried to tag along, get a little credit because he watches that win-loss thing. By the way, he got clobbered in 2 congressional races and primaries in Georgia and runoffs too. So Georgia tends to be the leading anti-Trump state now, which is something that would have been hard to predict.
It's funny.
Yeah, thanks to Governor Kemp, who's shown how a conservative can take him on and win. So to her point, she's a perfect fit. She crushed him, and now Mo Brooks is vanishing, and that's totally appropriate. And again, it's another signal that the 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 party's not out of the woods yet, but the people who do a simple linear story of decline into hell, even with all the cowardice among our elected officials and some of these moral questions right now,
Yeah.
politics is dynamic. It's always changing. There's going to be a lot to watch in the next year.
Nancy Mace, with the help of Nikki Haley, won in South
Right. And, well,
Carolina.
and a couple of handsprings. She's clearly been in the Nikki Haley school of spin, twist, flip, flop, whatever is required, because she went from anti-Trump to nobody loves Trump more than me, which is a very Haley-esque move. But yeah,
Well, that's
in
what
the
I
South
wanted. That's what I wanted to
Carolina,
ask you about when it comes to Katie Britt, because Katie Britt, I think, is probably more like you and me, but she took Trump's endorsement. I'm sure she said some nice things about Trump. It seems, you tell me what the dividing line is. Like, it seems like you can be normal, you could be team normal and win in the Republican Party, but what is the line? There is a line that you can't be like
yeah, the line
anti-Trump
was
or you,
impeachment. If now, by the way, I think they all should have voted for impeachment, and I'm proud of he richly deserved it. He's as bad as everyone says. Pelosi is right, and the Republicans are wrong about Donald Trump. And I say that as a conservative who's worked in conservative electoral politics for nearly 40 years, but it's the damn truth.
yeah, well,
Still,
but we're separating. So you and I will go on the record. Like, I would have impeached him twice and I would have removed him.
three
I would have
times.
probably impeached him more than
Right, right. But
twice.
you and I are going to get slaughtered in primaries because
Yeah.
that is the line, because then you're on team New York Times, Pelosi, the enemy tribe. Now, you can be a doubting member of the tribe, say, boy, I wish he'd tweet a little less or time to move on. And you can kind of criticize him as long as you embrace a lot of what people perceive to be popular about his issue agenda, which is attack Biden, say the border ought to have more machine gun nests. There are things that the primary voters will resonate to that came out of the Trumpian world. But if you leave the tribe and you're for impeachment, it's over. If you're a bit of a critic, but you have conservative bona fides, you can survive. And the new thing is going to be, he was great, but I think we need somebody younger with
Yeah.
an eye toward the future to continue the revolution. That's where they're heading now. And there are votes in that pile. And I'm not quite sure how Trump undoes that.
Yeah, and it was interesting, a few weeks ago when Georgia had the primary, CBS did this. They put together a montage video of Georgia Republicans they interviewed. And there was just a lot of people saying like, "Oh, well, we love Donald Trump, but he just doesn't always understand the right primary. Sometimes he just doesn't know all the details about who's good down here." And I wrote at the time, I think I wrote this for the Daily Beast, that once you start saying like, "We love Trump, but he just doesn't get it," it's a hop, skip, and a jump to like, we love Trump, but it's time to move on, or we love Trump, but you know he had his time, and it's time for Ron DeSantis. So I think there could be almost like a permission structure where people are like, we love him, and his time is up. And I actually asked some Republican strategists. I might have actually pinged you about this because I'm guessing that there have been places like, say, like North Dakota where you're running, and the culture in North Dakota, because I ran a race there a long time ago, the culture there at the time, there's a lot of social capital. Everybody knows everybody. And they love their politicians. So like, you can't say Byron Dorgan's a bad guy. It has to
Right.
be like, Byron Dorgan's friggin' awesome, but whatever. And I couldn't get a good example of a politician who instead of attacking the opponent has said we love him, but it's time to move on. But that has to be a part. There
Well,
has to be
it's
like a
coming next because Trump will hurt Trump, because Trump will freak out. And it's going to be like this will be an obscure show business poll. But when Jackie Mason, the comic, his career was on fire, he was doing great. He got on the Sullivan Show and he got angry and he had a bad moment on TV. It was later kind of redone in the Billy Crystal film that's now a musical, jukebox musical. Well, not really a jukebox musical, but a musical adapted from the movie Mr. Saturday Night. And when Trump starts to attack DeSantis for the sin of being good at being DeSantis, it's not going to help Trump. It's going to diminish him even more. But Trump emotionally won't be able to resist that. And
I would
again, it
love it
starts.
if we had that moment, but
Oh,
it
it's
just
coming.
seems
It's
like
coming. You got to let it cook. This is a slow cooker business. I mean, New York
but
Times would
we're
love to have that
chasing.
fight
We're
tomorrow, and they're
chasing,
trying
Mike.
to get it.
Every time Trump went after somebody in 2016, maybe with the exception of Carly Fiorina. But pretty much every time Trump went after someone, it worked. Now, Ron DeSantis might be a different kind of cat, and Trump may not have the same juice. But I'm like once bitten, twice shy.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I think DeSantis is different because he's operating in the space where Trump operated. It's not like, oh, you're an establishment guy, you're a Bush, or you're little Marco who's flip-flopping all over things in the senator. That's the great thing about being a governor. You're not as flip-floppy. And DeSantis has been out there hitting from the Republican grassroots point of view, not necessarily mine, home runs on cultural fights.
Yeah.
It would be a different world now if Disney a few months ago, instead of cowering, had said, okay, we can't believe it. We love Florida, but we're shutting the park down next week. DeSantis would have, that might have beat DeSantis. But I think DeSantis is better equipped, and Trump is fighting from weaker ground. Trump's ground is me, me, me. The election was stolen. I'm a martyr here. You owe me I'm the emperor. And DeSantis is, hey, taste filling, less calories, or whatever. I'm blowing the line from light beer.
Tastes great, less filling.
Tastes great, less filling. He's got a good pitch, and if Trump attacks him frontally, Trump's gonna weaken himself. But it'll take a while. Again, New York Times wants this fight tomorrow. It's not in DeSantis' interest yet. He should go get a big reelection, platform a bunch of issues, and pretty much ignore Trump and just keep growing. So Trump, the declining power, starts overreacting to the rising power, looking weaker and weaker and older and older.
You talked about pitching. You've talked about hitting home runs. Did you read that piece? I think it was in the New Yorker about DeSantis this week. There was an interesting tidbit in there. And I haven't figured out what it means.
I can only take so much New Yorker, but I do read it.
I don't even know if it was the New Yorker, but it was
good. I read
good.
Jane Meyer and my head explodes for a while, and I take a week off.
It could have been New York Magazine. It was one of these, elite, magazines. But there's a big piece about DeSantis this week, and it starts off talking about his dad. They interviewed his dad, and his dad did one of these things where, like, I shouldn't talk to you. I'm not going to talk to you, but let me talk to you.
Yeah, let me talk to you.
And the dad told him, when Ron DeSantis was a kid, he read this book by Ted Williams about how to hit, how to be a great baseball hitter. Ted Williams wrote this book. And the thing it taught him was you have to be very selective, only swing at the perfect pitch, take a lot of balls.
Right.
And his dad said, I would throw him, 1,000 pitches and he would only swing at 10 of them. And it drove me crazy. And I wonder if it turns out that DeSantis is very disciplined and knows when to hold them and when to fold them, so to speak, that if that will be an interesting metaphor for the discipline.
I think it'll be the go-to one. Now, it's really hard to hold pitches because the presidential world is 1,000 pitches a day, some of which look like they're worth taking. Because what happens is if you haven't done it before, you start thinking, I got to do something every day to get the jump on the other guys. I mean, you were alluding to this a little early. Can he wait? Or will there be Asa Hutchinson, will catch on? No, I don't think he is. So DeSantis has big size, big positioning, and he doesn't need to rush into Trump v. Trump stuff. What he needs to do is get bigger and bigger. Trump's the one who has to do something about DeSantis adroitly, which is not Trump's real talent. And hopefully DeSantis also read whatever the next book was, where don't be an asshole to so many people like Ted Williams. Because if he can combine those two, he's going to be a very formidable nomination candidate.
Yeah, Ted Williams was kind of a jerk, I think.
Yeah, he actually was. Genius baseball player, but not the best human being. But I'm a Detroit Tiger fan, and we've got Ty Cobb to apologize for, so I really can't.
Yeah, he used to sharpen his spikes.
Yeah,
Ty Cobb would sharpen his spikes and slide into people.
Yeah, he liked to kind of cut his way to bases. Yeah.
I'm an Orioles fan. We've got Brooks Robinson and Cal Ripken Jr.
Yeah, you got nice Iron Men.
We do. So it sounds. Let me just here we are in June of 2022. But would you put some money on DeSantis? How do you feel about Ron DeSantis?
Way too early. In fact, I'd be worried if I were DeSantis this early. Tends to be a curse, as President John Glenn will tell you. You can go down a lot of primary history of unstoppable, early front running campaigns. I will say the DeSantis cookie recipe is the most powerful one in the race right now. Big base, can raise money, has a big platform, being governor of Florida outside of Washington, which is a plus, and is set up for we'll see, who knows what could go wrong, but potentially a big win that he can make a momentum referendum out of, sort of like Gavin Newsom's going to do out here in California, where he also, I think, is running for president. So I think he's holding a lot of good cards, but it's really, really early. We also have to see if the guy can take a couple of punches. Hasn't really happened to him.
Indeed. Well, this has been a great conversation. Any final thoughts or plugs before we call it a night?
No, I mean, LA mayor's race is kind of interesting, but that's probably parochial. We have a non-left winger, a Democrat, but kind of a more conservative, common sense Democrat, Rick Caruso, a buddy of mine, running kind of an underdog race in my view, but a powerful one on message against kind of a generic Democrat. We're going to have to look into that. Local Paul Karen Bass. And Caruso's running on, why don't we let the cops be cops, and why don't we, do something about the homeless crisis that involves helping them, but not necessarily, round the clock therapy and let them move into your front yard and terrify your kids. So Caruso, in a multi-way in the primary, came in behind, about 7 points behind her, but now we got a runoff. And for the first time in a long time, we're going to have an LA mayor's race on a November general election day. Normally it's some off year, no turnout election, so the unions can dominate it. And even though it's a very left of center Democratic city, people are fed up. So the Caruso Quality of Life campaign, which kind of echoes to Eric Adams, who won along with others running on the same thing, who got a lot of votes in New York. This could be really interesting in LA. It could be a turning point in the model we've had of city government, which is kind of almost a caricature of lefty indulgences.
How can people follow you on Twitter and listen to your podcast?
Oh, thank you for that. Now there's a plug. I'm at Murphy Mike, my name backwards, and you can hear me and my old buddy pickup. You can hear me and my old buddy David Axelrod and Robert Gibbs on occasion at Hacks on Tap, where we kind of talk like the old political bloviators we are, but from having been really in the room and being pretty well wired still into what's really going on. You can also go to hacksontap.bulletin.com and for free, well, time lasts, free, subscribe to the kind of fun insider newsletter that Gibbs and I knock out twice a week, comes by email, totally free, hacksontap.bulletin.com. So there you go. That's the full suite of stuff.
Awesome. Well, always a pleasure talking with you, Mike Murphy. Thank you for coming back on the news.
Thank you, Matt.